Great, welcome everybody to this first Google Plus Hangout on Air of about should leaders tweet personally. I'm Matthias Lüfgens, head of the digital practice of the public relations firm Burson Marsteller, and also author of the diplomacy study. And I'm very pleased to have a stellar cast with me today, including two ambassadors, several diplomats from around the world. We will introduce them as we go along. Unfortunately, Ambassador Tom Fletcher, the UK ambassador from Lebanon, will be 5 to 10 minutes late, but he will join this panel later. However, I'm very happy to have with us also Nicola Klause, the Swedish ambassador to the UK, live from London. And Ambassador Klause, I would like to start with you. You're on Twitter, you've joined recently. Do you write all your tweets yourself?
Yes, I do, but I sometimes seek advice from my colleagues because you cannot always trust your own judgment. You have to be humble in this business.
Do you send your tweets to your staff before you send it?
Not always, but there might be things that I want to discuss before sending them off. So it really depends on the situation. But quite often I do it myself. But then again, as I said, I sometimes go for colleagues.
How often do you tweet? How do you find the time to tweet?
Well, I think it really depends, and I don't sort of measure things in by the way of how often I tweet, because I see Twitter very much also as a way of gathering information. So I think sending messages is very important, but gathering information might be even more important for us diplomats.
So how much time do you spend on Twitter each day?
Well, gathering information, I would say that I spend quite a lot of time on Twitter, and depends on the situation, but in between meetings, there might be a meeting where what's happening on Twitter feed is so important that you would actually follow Twitter during the meeting. But as I said, depends upon the situation. But I do consider it to be a very, very important tool.
So what do you say to your colleagues, either in London or in the Swedish Foreign Network, who are not on Twitter?
Well, I think no thoughtful person, believer or non-believer in social media, can neglect the fact that we see explosive developments in this field. And I think that if you decide to be outside of this field, I think you're losing out quite a bit. So
Sorry for this mishap. That's the what always happens. One question, Ambassador Klause, what are the things that you stopped doing that you're doing now that have been replaced by Twitter?
Well, I think when it comes to following the Twitter feed, obviously that means at times that I have a little less time for regular media. So I have to be more disciplined throughout the day. So I sort of know that in the morning you have newspapers, throughout the day you have Twitter feeds, but you also have television. But I think what we do see is that speed is everything. So you have to be really you have to use the tools that you have at the right time point. But I'm a bit old-fashioned in the morning, so I like my newspapers.
But I suppose you read the newspapers online now and share what you read on Twitter.
Well, in the morning I don't, because it's just something about holding on to that piece of paper that I rather like. But then throughout the day, obviously there will be things that I read on the internet. That's inevitable. But I just enjoy that cup of tea with a bunch of newspapers.
So which are the times during the day when you basically dip into your Twitter feed?
Well, I would say that going to meetings, as I said, in between meetings, traveling. So I would say that there's so many times throughout the day that you do it, but it's hard to sort of say that it's exactly at this time point. And then it's also looking at a specific situation, like now on Ukraine, you would be in a situation where you really have to follow the Twitter feed on a very regular basis. That's how I feel, to be up to speed with things. I think it's very, very important.
Do you? I've seen you've retweeted a couple of times Foreign Minister Carl Bildt. Do you feel obliged to retweet your foreign minister, or is that are there directions from Stockholm that you should retweet Carl Bildt, or how does that work?
No, there's no such message, but he's quite inspirational and or tweets that I think the people that follow me in the UK might sort of really enjoy reading. So, but it's not something that that I would do all the time. But every now and then there's something that this is really something that I want to get to my followers.
Have you ever gotten into trouble for sending a tweet?
Not yet. But I don't think you can be very risk-averse in this business if you're on Twitter. And as I said, you might very well end up doing something that you think is quite all right at the moment, but then afterwards you realize, well, maybe that was not the best thing to do. And that's why in certain situations it's always good to confer with colleagues. But minor mishaps inevitable in the future. But then I'll say how fascinating and move on.
Maybe this is a great segue to Stockholm, to Charlotta. Are you? Unfortunately, we can't see you. The camera isn't working. But are you happy with the way the ambassadors, the Swedish ambassadors, tweet? As far as I understand, every single one of them, at least every single embassy, is on Twitter.
I think we are happy that we have all the ambassadors and all the embassies, I would say, online, on Twitter and Facebook, where they are accessible. However, we are still in a learning process, I would say. Enormous progress during this year, since all foreign missions came online, in social media, I mean. I would say that it's much better now than half a year ago. We've been moving from a coaching process explaining why it's necessary and useful to be in social media, and how digital diplomacy can help us in our mission as diplomats. But it's also been quite a voyage, to speak about communication in a different way. Or explain that communication is not social media only, but digital diplomacy is more. I think Nicola describes it very well, that we tweet about almost everything we do. It's not something that is really, truly intertwined in our work yet. I see many ambassadors being very active, but we still need to talk with them about what are their target groups, what are the subjects they want to push forward, and what channel is the right way to communicate or reach out to a certain group. And so in that area, in this aspect, we are still in a learning process, I would say.
I mean, you have a foreign minister, Carl Bildt. He was famous for sending the first email to then President Bill Clinton. Now he's on Twitter. He's personally on Twitter, and does he check the tweets with you before he sends them? I mean, I didn't introduce you, Charlotta Ozaki-Mathias, head of communication at the Swedish Foreign Ministry. So basically, does he check these tweets with you, or do you discover them in the morning when you wake up?
We discover them in the morning. He does not check his tweets. He's very. I mean, first of all, he writes them himself, and he has such a flow in his activity that nobody is in control of what he does. We try to give him support if he asks for it. One of my tasks is not to only to encourage him to go on what he is doing, but to encourage our units at the MFA, but also embassies out in the world, to give advice of what he could look for in the future, because he also might need ideas what to tweet about. He's extremely self-going, but we want the whole ministry to be more engaged in the same way as we used to be more engaged in press releases and and formal notes from relevant units before we want our colleagues in the ministry to pay attention to the thinking of tweets for them, not only the foreign minister, but also the minister for trade and the minister for development assistance, for example.
So what does Carl Bildt say to ambassadors? I mean, is it kind of, are they obliged to set up personal Twitter profiles?
No, he says that everybody should be on Twitter, all embassies. And if the ambassador chooses to do it in his personal capacity, tant mieux. If he is or she is very reluctant, it could be done also out of the official embassy account. But yes, he requests everybody to do it.
And what about his peers in the government? As far as I know, Prime Minister Reinfeldt is not on Twitter. Is he a bit of an oddball in the Swedish government?
50-50, I would say. 50-50. I mean, all politicians almost are on Twitter today, so there are exceptions. But he's in the lead, though, absolutely. He's very known in Sweden to be loving Twitter. He finds it an extremely efficient tool.
Thank you very much, Charlotta. With that, I'd like to move over the pond to Martha McLean, Deputy Director for Online Communications at the Canadian Department for Foreign Affairs. Martha, you're in the process of putting every single Canadian embassy and mission online. The latest one actually to join Twitter was just 2 days ago, the Canadian Embassy in Turkey, exactly during the time when Twitter is blocked in Turkey. How do you go about to help embassies and ambassadors to embrace Twitter communications?
Thanks, Matthias. I think similar to the comments just raised, by Charlotta, our emphasis has certainly been on the training over the last few years. I think those of us in the digital diplomacy field have known this wave was coming, and that we'd see an increasing number of embassies and ambassadors online at some point. I think we're certainly seeing that now. But up until now, the big issue has been making sure our staff abroad have the skills and knowledge they need in order to help that wave move forward. So certainly my emphasis has been on the training and giving people exposure to networks that they likely maybe weren't as exposed to, showing them the ins and outs of how they can use these tools professionally, knowing that the official capacity would soon come along. And Ambassador Klaas's point earlier of just being able to listen and see the information that you can get from this, whether you choose to be engaged or not, is usually the foundation of my approach. And typically when people see what they can glean from the networks and the communities, the engagement soon follows once they have a little more information at their fingertips.
So I know that the Canadian Foreign Office, you have ambassadors who have personal Twitter accounts with their first and last name, but you also have institutional accounts which are used as personal accounts. Can you explain this, please?
Certainly. I think similar to Sweden, the ambassadors, many of our ambassadors have what I would consider their professional accounts. They likely will move with them when they move from one embassy to another or to another position. It's our embassies themselves that have more of the official accounts. So I think the model is very similar to that was just highlighted with Sweden, and showing that the embassy account will be the virtual bricks and mortar, if you will, of the programming in country and the services and our objectives, and it's the ambassador who can then lend his or her voice through their own account. And those are the accounts that I think people tend to connect more with an individual rather than a building or an organization. And I think it's been interesting watching especially the Swedish and British examples that were at the forefront with most of their ambassadors online, and seeing the different voices that come through that certainly add some flavor to what the official embassy accounts do.
But do you think we could have official accounts for ambassadors, institutional ones, which will be handed from one ambassador to the other? The examples I would think of is the papal account, the Pontifex account, which is given from one pope to another.
I think that's certainly a model. We have now some ambassadors that have what we term official accounts by way of their branding and the recognition of Canadian government symbols. The intent being that if that ambassador would leave their post and another ambassador comes in, that you would simply change the name of the account, but everything would remain equal. I think it's really interesting as we have a critical mass now, Matthias, to see how countries are going to handle this. I think there will probably be a few different ways. The concern being now or recognizing that not every ambassador has an account. So if you have someone, if for instance Tom Fletcher, I'll look forward to his thoughts, or even Ambassador Klaus, if they move on and have an official account and their successor isn't as savvy on social media, what then happens to that account? I think digital handovers, if it's a more professional account, can be handled quite well, and introduce your successor just by using their Twitter handle. But I think if it's an official account, the assumption is that whoever's coming in to succeed that person will also be on social media, and that'll be interesting to see how the community follows an individual versus the official account.
Ambassador Klauser, can I just put that question directly to you?
Well, I think the official account is what obviously stays, but I find it a bit hard to envisage that one would be able to take one's own personal account and just hand it over to one's successor, because it would also perhaps make it a bit difficult for the successor. That, I mean, you want to create your own environment. So I'm not really sure about that. I hadn't really thought actually about that was something one could do, but who knows?
So do you want to keep your followers and your accounts when you leave your post in London?
Well, there is a smooth way of handing it over, but maybe I'm not sort of enough into how it would actually work. I mean, if it was possible, I wouldn't have anything against it. It was just me thinking that I'm not sure it would be that easy. There are lots of sort of legal aspects as well. So, I mean, you're right and you're responsible, but you're right, and then suddenly you put that to someone else. I'm not really sure. So I'd be a bit careful about saying yes or no. I'm open to things that will make it simpler for the embassy. I'm in general pro.
Thank you. That brings me over to Andrea Sondra, Press and Communications Officer at the Italian Embassy in Washington. Andreas, you have an ambassador who is also tweeting personally. Do you help him draft some of his tweets?
Well, we help him like a little bit. I think for him, Twitter has become like a very personal sort of tool, especially in the morning. It's part of his routine, just with reading newspapers. It goes on his iPad and he reads, if there's any engagement on his Twitter account. He gets a lot of DMs, especially with people that he follows. So most of the engagement happens in the morning for him. So for him, a lot of emphasis is when he uses Twitter for listening to people and see what's going on. So that's part of his routine in the morning. We help him a little bit in the morning in terms of he comes to us and he asks us what the ministry is saying on different matters, what kind of priorities we have for the day, if we have events at the embassy going on, if we have any important events throughout the country, throughout the U.S. So that's in part how we help him. And we also help him in sort of like finding Twitter profiles of people that he meets during the day, because he likes during the day to tweet about his meetings and what it was discussed during those meetings.
It's a very interesting point, the number of direct messages. So he does get a lot of direct messages. Is there secret Twitter diplomacy?
There's no secret Twitter diplomacy. Sometimes it's just like, I'm running a little bit late, especially if it's like a friend of his or somebody that he keeps seeing like over and over again, and he tweets back and forth with. So I don't think there's anything like secretive going on. It's just like using Twitter as a sort of like easy way to message people.
But you have access to his Twitter feed and to his Twitter handle. You can see these direct messages.
Yes, we can. And especially during the day, especially if he has like a very sort of busy agenda, what we do is we help him in seeing exactly what's going on and telling him like, do you want to respond to this? Do you not? Like, and that's part of our help with his Twitter profile.
I think Ambassador Tom Fletcher just joined. I don't know if you can hear us or see us. The video seems to be stalled.
Hear you and see you. Can you hear?
There you are. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you had a meeting. We wanted to start this hangout with you. We've come quite a long way. Your colleague Nicola Klase, the Swedish ambassador in the UK, has talked about her personal experiences. I just want to ask you, sir. Is there anybody who's helping you tweet? Do you give anybody else the login of your Twitter handle?
Well, firstly, I mean, apologies that I was held up getting here. I was out doing some real diplomacy and also dodging the traffic. Yes, my team, the comms team here, do have my logins, and every now and again I will text them through or email them through a tweet that I want to issue. But they don't tweet on my behalf. They tweet on the official account on behalf of the embassy. I like to send all my own tweets myself.
So how much time do you spend a day on Twitter? Are there specific times when you will tweet, or how do you manage your Twitter activity?
I dip in and out. I spend much more time on Twitter than my family would like, and probably some of my colleagues would like. I think that goes for probably most of us involved in this conversation. I probably spend an hour and a half to 2 hours a day on Twitter. Most of that is information gathering, information management. Maybe 15 minutes to half an hour of that will be engagement. And then I suppose 5 to 10 minutes of it is actually transmitting stuff, actually sending out, initiating tweets and so on. But yeah, it adds up. But mainly, I spend a lot of time in the car here. We have very, very bad traffic jams, and I have a long convoy of security. So I tend to have those moments in the car, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, just to get on top of my Twitter account.
Do you inform your team before sending a tweet, or do they discover it just in their Twitter stream?
They just discover it. And most of the time, I think they're happy with that. Now and again, if we're doing a specific public diplomacy event, we'll discuss beforehand the kinds of themes or the kinds of messages we can get out. And in theory, everything I tweet is, related in some way to our overall campaign messaging. So not too much of it should be a complete surprise to them, but every now and again something comes through that gives them a shock.
I've put this question to Ambassador Klase. What do you say to your colleagues either in Beirut or your colleagues at the Foreign Office who are not yet on Twitter? How do you convince them to set up a personal Twitter account?
Well, I say to all those who have someone else tweeting on their behalf, I say they're not really on Twitter, and so they can't claim to be. I say there are a lot of people who are frightened of the risks involved, and I say to them, the greatest risk is not making a mistake on Twitter, it's not being on there in the first place. And at the Ambassadors Conference last year, I said to them they had to try and imagine it as like a huge reception. And all of their contacts are there, engaging with each other, exchanging information, influencing each other. And basically, you wouldn't, if it was a diplomatic reception, you wouldn't delegate that to someone else. You wouldn't go along and just stand in the corner shouting your messages at the top of your voice, as some people do in digital diplomacy. You wouldn't go along and be silent, just lurk in the corner, as some of our colleagues do on Twitter. You'd be in there, exchanging views, engaging, being part of it. And they need to get into that mindset when they're thinking about Twitter.
And this brings me over to Andrew Strolan, the European Media Director for Human Rights Watch in London. I think you would agree that personal Twitter accounts have to be managed personally. It's I think you used a great image there. Leaders are not writing their own how do you say, speeches. So do you think somebody else could write tweets for them, or should write tweets for them?
Well, I think you see, you can see some input from others when people are getting, especially when people are getting started on Twitter. I think it helps for people who have a little bit more experience in kind of boiling things down to the 140 characters. But really, I mean, I say this all the time, and if you're really trusting your voice to someone else, then wow, you really better be trusting that person a lot. I think it's much better to be writing your own tweets, approving your own speeches, at least. And it works better. I mean, it simply, you can really tell if you follow someone and they're really looking at their tweets. You can just tell who's doing it and who's not. And it's completely clear. So, there's just not really a point in having someone else doing it for you, and the risks are far outweigh any benefits.
When you were at the International Crisis Group, you weren't not able to get your executive onto Twitter, or actively onto Twitter. How do you convince leaders to join Twitter personally?
Well, judging by that, I don't. But I think you have to show that it works, and I think there's I'm not so sure there's that much skepticism now, but 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago, there was an enormous amount of skepticism, and we had to roll out examples of when it worked, and we had to show exchanges between ambassadors, we had to show exchanges between foreign ministers, and show that this is really where things were happening, that this was the seminar, or the colloquial, or the conference, or the cocktail party where everybody was at, and people will jump into that, and I think not everybody will, and I still know people who don't write and answer their own emails. So some people just don't get comfortable with the technology at some point, and so you're never going to get 100% people involved in diplomacy into this kind of virtual diplomacy. But for those of us outside, like Human Rights Watch or the International Crisis Group, trying to reach into the diplomatic world and trying to talk to the diplomats, trying to talk to the foreign ministers and others at the desks, it's an absolutely amazing tool to have those conversations, to highlight what we're concerned with on a given day, and to find out what others are interested in, and try to build up those kind of contacts on that level, on that diplomatic level. And we're not really using it as a mass mobilization tool at all. We're using it as an advocacy tool to reach out to those individuals.
I recall a couple of famous exchanges that you had with the President Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. President of Rwanda. He is tweeting personally. Are you happy that he is personally engaged?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, now we've had some revelations in the last week or two about Paul Kagame's account, and whoever has been helping him with it is also, or whoever has access to it, has also been running some really nasty trolls who have been harassing some people as well. So I think there's some pretty obvious problems with that sort of strategy, especially when it all leaks out. I think that kind of aggressiveness, we're talking about diplomacy here. I don't think it's particularly useful, and I think it only leads to more problems. I mean, it's like any communications. If you have that kind of drum-beating, very aggressive tone, and your language, I've had conversations back and forth with the former Uzbekistan's former ambassador to Geneva, Gulnara Karimova, who's also the daughter of the president of Uzbekistan. When she came out with things that looked pretty much like threats, that doesn't really do her message, or her image, or the reputation of her country any good. So I'm not really sure that kind of aggressive tactic really works.
It's interesting to see over the past weeks we've seen some very official exchanges between embassies, especially over Ukraine. And I want to go over to Royshen Trainer. She's the online editor of the International Crisis Group. In the preparation of this talk, Royshen, you said that the most important is training. How do you train your colleagues, your staff, or how do you think leaders should be trained?
Well, absolutely. I think that's what it all really comes down to, because we're expecting these people who have huge skills in a certain area to open up to something that you and I can do in our sleep, really. And we need to inform them about it, train them, to show them. I think it's, you know, there's huge examples from recently in Stockholm, the Stockholm Initiative, what they did. I think something like that is really fantastic. And you have it as well in the UK Foreign Office too, and you have it in the US, you have it in Canada, and these training sessions are something we need to do more and more. And yet for me, that's really the most important thing, because I really think you've got three types, or you've got different types of tweeting ambassadors or foreign ministries. You have the ones that are doing it themselves, so Ambassador Fletcher, Ambassador Klesser, who are doing these things themselves, and I think that's hugely important, and that is really the best way to be. But I think it's also important, another type, and it's still really, really essential to have, is that type that doesn't tweet all the time, that it's not always them, but they partake in, like Obama, in a Twitter town hall or something like that, and it shows that they get it. You know, you can have an hour of Q&A with a political leader, and I think that shows that they're really trying. You know, it's not their thing, it's not their area, but they're really trying to open up to these new digital tools and to partake in it. And I think something like that is really interesting to see.
Interesting you mentioned Barack Obama. It is a campaign account, and he was very active, of course, during both campaigns in 2008 and 2012. We have also on the panel Karen Melchior, who formerly diplomat in London. Karen, you're now running to be you're a candidate for the European parliamentary elections. Have you done a couple of Twitter Q&As already, and will you continue your Twitter activity if you will be elected? Karen? Oops. Hello, Karen. I guess she can't hear us, or we can't hear you, Karen. Anyway, maybe I'll just go back to Ambassador Fletcher. How have you been trained on Twitter?
I found the best way was just to kind of lurk on Twitter for a week or two at the beginning before plunging in. I came to it 2.5 years ago as a bit of a Luddite, really. I didn't have my own Twitter account before I started this job. But I think there's no substitute for just getting on with it and getting a feel for the kind of conversations other people are having, getting a feel for your own comfort level with risk. And I'm quite an advocate of actually taking as many risks as possible and picking some arguments here and there, as long as you pick the right ones. But no, I haven't had any formal training.
And now?
Thanks from colleagues.
And for colleagues who are now deciding they want to join Twitter, is there a training session in London, or how does it work?
There isn't. I mean, we've got, in most embassies, we'll have a comms team who will be, digital natives normally. They'll know their way around. And I'd advise any ambassador to go and talk to his comms people or her comms people before starting, rather than just charging in. So you don't make too many embarrassing mistakes that way. Sort of, is this working type tweet that some people send out early on. But I think there's no substitute. You've just got to get stuck in. The reality of Twitter is it works best if you're authentic, I think. And I think the best diplomatic Twitter accounts or political Twitter accounts are the ones which are most authentic. And so you've just got to find your own voice, as you do in any other medium.
Charlotta, you have been training ambassadors around the world. I think you were recently in Asia on a training mission. Can you tell us how you train ambassadors of the Swedish Foreign Network?
I would say we have three challenges and 3 ways of training. One is just by putting digital diplomacy into the program for ambassadors leaving for new posts. Second part is for us, for me and my colleagues, to travel to, for example, where we were last week, to regional ambassadors meeting and have an agenda point on let's say, public diplomacy and digital diplomacy. And then we also invite our ambassadors and staff in general working with digital diplomacy to pass by our office here in Stockholm when they are in Stockholm to get training. We have noticed that no matter how many good advice we send out by email and on the internet, the person-to-person meeting is key to really get our ambassadors on board and dive into doing this, finding their own tone, etc., as Tom mentioned. So we've been trying to challenge of training and coaching colleagues from different angles. It's only a year ago when our foreign minister, Carl Bildt, requested all our foreign missions to be on Twitter and Facebook. During this year, we've been working intensively with all different kinds of training and coaching. And I don't say that we have one concept, but we try to tailor-make training for many of our staff and colleagues. Yeah.
Question to Ambassador Klause: how have you been trained on Twitter?
Well, I have very good staff. So we've had individual sessions, and then we've actually had training for the whole staff, where we all sort of participate and exchange views, and where we also have a lot of contacts with the Foreign Office, because I find it's really good when you have these kinds of exchanges between different ministries to sort of learn from each other, and that's been really useful. But all of my staff are on Twitter, and many of them are on because of information gathering, but I think that's great. So we have a very positive attitude, but we always feel that the training sort of has to be something that you keep on doing, because things develop and there might be things that you've mistakes that you made that you need to learn from, but just having a rather relaxed attitude with a lot of trust, so that people feel that they have support for what they're doing.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, we're 40 minutes into this Google Hangout. I don't want to keep you too long, but I'd like to finish up this discussion, which I want to hear from every one of you. What are some advice, one piece of advice that you would give to other ambassadors or political leaders who want to join Twitter? Maybe we'll start with you, Ambassador Klause.
Well, I would say in general, the way I try to live my life is to learn something every day and have a good laugh every day. So I think on Twitter that works quite well. But be a bit careful as well. So good judgment gets you a long way. And sometimes, as I said at the beginning, you can't trust yourself. And it might sound a bit pessimistic, but there are times where you think you have a brilliant idea, but it might not be the best idea. And if you somehow share some wild ideas with your colleagues, they might tell you if it's fine or not.
Next one, maybe Andreas. I know you have to leave now, so if you can just wrap it up, what advice would you give to ambassadors?
I think one of the advice would be not to be scared or afraid to learn from younger people. This is a subject in where possibly ambassadors have a little bit of problems with the adaptation to the tools at the very beginning. For younger people, there's no adaptation. I was talking to a group of young professionals in foreign policy here in DC, and they were telling us every time we talk about digital diplomacy, we talk and social media, we talk about adaptation. But they grew up already with tools like Twitter and Facebook. They don't need adaptation. They want to move forward and see how they can really use those tools for foreign policy and diplomacy in their regular job. So I think at this point, one of the advice would be, don't be afraid to learn. Learning is a process. It goes on for your entire life. And when it comes to Twitter and Facebook, don't be afraid to learn from the younger generation. Ambassador Fletcher?
I'd say to be authentic is very important, to be yourself on there. Secondly, I think it's always important to remember to be engage, to be engaging, to listen and interact, not just to transmit. But also, I think to be purposeful and to remember that at the end of the day, you're communicating your national brand, you're communicating a sense of national interest, and so by all means you can retweet photos of cute cats or football scores and things, but you've got to always come back to what is really core national interest. You need to think about what your digital epitaph will be at the end of this. If someone put all your tweets back to back from 3 years in the job, what would that say about you, about the job, and about the country you're representing?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Martha?
Well, I think both ambassadors have really captured things well. I certainly encourage our embassy staff and ambassadors to not miss out on the richness of communities and dialogues that are going on online now. And for our ambassadors in particular, their voices are so important to us and to our countries. And I think from a global citizenship perspective, having an opportunity to share their voice with a wider community is tremendous, and I'm thrilled to see so many of them taking that opportunity.
Excellent. Charlotta?
Well, what I always start saying is, don't be afraid. Don't think that this is a hurdle in your daily work and that it will be it's difficult and cumbersome. I try to encourage colleagues to start using Twitter as a way of catching up with news. Don't wait for Financial Times to arrive in the morning. Step-by-step approach. If you are in a country where there are lots of political sensitivities of any of the activities you are on, be careful. You don't need to be a broadcaster to say to censor or to analyze and comment on everything that is going on in your country, but be very clear with the goal of who you are communicating with and why. So quite simple, basic communication skills, I would say.
Thank you. Andrew?
I mean, it's all been very good advice so far on engagement. I'm not sure what I can add, to be honest, but I think one thing is to try to work with, engage with, and promote those individuals and other countries and other ambassadors and other groups, other individuals that share your views or your country's views on those particular issues. I mean, there are overlaps all over, where there are individuals where Human Rights Watch will agree and the foreign minister will retweet one of our reports or engage with one of our analysts about something, saying, "Oh, I see the new report, but have you looked into this side of it? No, we haven't," or "Yes, we have." And those kind of engagements really develop into something. That's positive, I think, for both sides, both for an international NGO like Human Rights Watch, but also for the ambassador concerned.
Thank you. And Roisin, what is your piece of advice?
Well, yes, I agree completely, obviously, with everything that everybody's said so far. I suppose I would just say to trust the expertise of your staff, of those around you who do this every day, and to really dive into it, to go for it. And of course, always to remember, never tweet something that you don't want to see on the front page of the newspaper. And can I just say as well to remember the importance of it for people on the other end who are outside this world, who are seeing these tweets and who are able to engage, to realize how important it is for people like us that we have that ability to contact those people. Just last week I sent a tweet to Ambassador Fletcher himself and he responded, and something small like that is worth a lot to people like us.
It made your day, I guess.
It did. It made my day.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. I think this Google Hangout made my day. Thank you very, very much for participating. If there's one thing I can say about training, I advocate always training on Twitter with a protected account. People can do that for a week, a month, to get the knack of it, which is kind of a nice training. Then about, writing the tweets personally, we do advise clients, on Twitter, especially executives now, CEOs, and I think executives from corporations can learn a lot from ambassadors, from diplomats, on how to be ambassadors for their own companies. So I would like to thank you all for this first Google Plus Hangout. We'll do one again, if we find a specific topic. Thank you very, very much for your time, and thanks to everyone else for watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.